Welcome back, friends, to the second day in our third panel here at the Deep Truth Symposium, Visionaries Speak Out. I am Tom Kiely, your moderator, and our third panel today and final one for today is called Triple Blockade, the Israeli attack on Gaza, free speech, and democracy. And once again, I would like to remind all you viewers that the inspiration for this Deep Truth Symposium was the fact that we could not make these presentations in New York City at the 2018 Left Forum. And our speakers did not want to be deterred, so we endeavored to provide you an ability to hear their voice so you yourself could make up your own mind as to whether or not these speakers should be heard or not, or whether you should be protected from their words. So let's start with our first speaker on this panel. We welcome back Alison Weir. She was with us last night, albeit by videotape. Today she's with us live. And Alison, just an indefatigable journalist who some time ago discovered the plight of the Palestinian people and has been working so hard to make Americans more aware of what is going on in Palestine. Her organization and website is called If Americans Knew. Alison, welcome back to the Deep Truth Conference.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for giving us a chance to give the information that we were hoping to give live and in person in New York at the Left Forum conference, but we're prevented from doing so. So today I'll be speaking on the If Americans Knew panel on Gaza and censorship. And I've been asked for my particular segment to address two specific topics. First of all, to go into some detail and explain the censorship of our If Americans Knew panel by the Left Forum and some of the backstory to that. There's a long backstory, so I'll try to keep that as brief as I'm able to. And then for the second half of my talk, I'll be giving a prequel to Gaza. A lot of people, fortunately, I think, have been following what's been going on in Gaza recently for the past over 2 months of nonviolent demonstrations met by lethal violence. So my role is to tell what came before that and to describe my trip there as a freelance reporter in early 2001. But anyway, starting with the first half of my topic, the Left Forum censorship of the If Americans Knew panel. I guess I'll start with the backstory that last year I was honored to be invited to be on a panel speaking about Palestine at the Left Forum. My fellow panelist, Joel Simpson, and I were very pleased to see that it was extremely well attended. I think all of the seats were taken, and I think some people were even standing in the back. It was very well received. People were enthusiastic. There were a lot of questions and discussion, and it seemed to have been a very successful panel. So this year, we decided at If Americans Knew that we would submit our own panel where we could tell more about Palestine, specifically address Gaza, and tell about the censorship and all the efforts to try to silence the voices that are trying to speak about Palestine. So we submitted a panel. It was, as you'll see in today's panel, very diverse. A Palestinian American from Gaza, a Palestinian Colombian American filmmaker, a blogger from Illinois, and myself from the San Francisco area. But sadly, it was rejected by the Left Forum without explanation. Even though we've been working on this issue for very long, and many people feel that we're an important organization working on the Palestinian issue, the Left Forum didn't allow us to have a panel. We discovered afterwards what had gone on, so I will share some of that with you. My background is journalism, and journalists, we just think people should know things. We don't sort of like behind the scenes maneuvering and sort of elitist point where some people are allowed to know things and other people you don't tell publicly what's going on. So in general, I think everybody has the right to know what's going on, and I believe in the public sort of right to know. So I'll go into some of the background. What we discovered is that The program director, I think the person in charge of programming, is an individual named Marcus Grach. I hope I'm pronouncing his word correctly. Apparently, he decided to reject our panel based on accusations against us by Jewish Voice for Peace. Unfortunately, Marcus, whom I've never met and I expect is a good person, but he didn't check those accusations with us and give us the chance to defend ourselves, to counter that, to give the real information at all. Unfortunately, also, I'm sure he was very busy. The Left Forum is a major, very complicated event. So I'm afraid he was too busy to look into the accusations. If he had done so, he would have found that they have been discredited by many people. We had addressed every one of the points against us and provided the factual information about it. Even more important, there are two very large public letters, petitions in support of us and opposed to the Jewish Voice for Peace leadership's condemnation of us and accusations against us. These two petitions have been signed by massive numbers of people, some of the most respected leaders in Palestine itself, nonviolence leaders, some of the Palestinian scholars, many of the American activists and international activists working on this issue, many of the members that went on flotilla missions, risking their lives to bring justice to Palestine. Many members of Jewish Voice for Peace signed these petitions in support of us and in opposition to their leaders' accusations, unfounded accusations against us. It's unfortunate Marcus didn't discover those things, because if he had, I suspect we would have given this panel at the Left Forum. At least I hope that's what would have happened. So just to go into that a little bit more, because I keep hearing about these accusations. They're continually used against us, especially by Zionists, attempting to block our information, to suppress my book, and to prevent my talks. So I'm going to address a little bit more about what these two petitions said. The first one was signed by over 2,000 people. You can look at them, and it's really an amazing array of people that signed the petition. It said, quote, "We are dismayed by the recent unfounded attacks on one of the top organizations working on this issue, If Americans Knew, and its dedicated leader, Alison Weir." The petition says, quote, "We believe that the vitriolic, ADL-like accusations that Alison Weir is, quote, anti-Semitic and or racist are scurrilous and without foundation." They are without foundation. I have a life history of opposing all racism and all bigotry. The petition says, quote, "We believe strongly that secret dossiers, ideological inquisitions, double standards, misrepresentations, spreading innuendo, and attempting to excommunicate groups or individuals one disagrees with from the ranks of the movement sow unnecessary divisions and distract from what must be our main focus, building the broad united front that's necessary to change U.S. policy in the Middle East and to help Palestinians obtain justice in their homeland." The second petition was also quite strong, signed by about 2,000 people. It said, quote, "We must not undermine one another. None of us must act as gatekeepers, trying to limit or dominate the movement. Instead, we must all coexist and focus our energy and resources on our goal, peace and justice in Palestine." I believe in that strongly. I believe JVP is doing much important work. I encourage people to look and join the work that they've done. So why were these accusations against us that prevented us from having this panel live in New York City at the Left Forum in 2018? What's behind this? Many people have speculated about that. It's very puzzling to many people who were shocked to see these attacks on us by JVP, by the JVP leadership. Again, let me emphasize, it's not the JVP membership. Many members have been very supportive of us. Some JVP members have sponsored my talks, etc. But one person looked into the situation, well, many did, but one of them wrote an article on Counterpunch that I think did a very good job of explaining what might be behind what's going on to censor some of the information about Palestine that many of us feel is extremely important for everyone to have the chance to learn about. In this article on Counterpunch, longtime peace activist Jack Dresser wrote, quote, Alison's politically incorrect policy has been to disseminate salient facts to anyone, anywhere, to achieve the broadest possible reach among American citizens without political discrimination. That's entirely correct. Our view at If Americans Knew is that since the US gives Israel over $10 million per day, that gives American citizens the responsibility to know how our money is being used by Israel. And I feel it also gives every American citizen, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, or political orientation, the right to know that information and the obligation to act in ways that they feel are morally required. The article in Counterpunch goes on to discuss more why these attacks continue against If Americans Knew and why there's this attempt to suppress our information. Quote, unlike the organizations attacking her, Alison has always taken an unequivocal and uncompromising position against the legality and morality of the entire Zionist project, focusing on the 1948 Nakba and UN-established right of return, not just the Israeli occupation. So-called liberal or progressive Zionists evade the former and often pretend that the crimes began in 1967. Quote, those of us firmly supporting justice for Palestinians have observed JVP for many years as compromised by Zionist colonial sympathies, but improving recently by endorsing the full BDS campaign, unquote. Just briefly, unfortunately, that part I'm concerned about because while JVP has belatedly joined the BDS campaign, this is the Boycott Against Israel campaign, I'm not sure to what degree it, given that the head of JVP's spouse works for an Israeli company. And the name of the company is Checkpoint Software, named after the notorious checkpoints at which Palestinians are routinely humiliated, often beaten, sometimes shot, sometimes killed. The checkpoints at which people are often prevented from going to their work, to school, to the hospital. Checkpoints where Palestinian women trying to go to the hospital to give birth have been stopped. Their babies dying at the checkpoint. Sometimes the mothers themselves also dying at these checkpoints. Going back to the Counterpunch article, it says the timing of the excommunication of me is not random. I suspect that it is publication of her book Against Our Better Judgment that has released long stockpiled ammo against her, however flimsy, especially her revelations of arguably treasonous conduct by our first two widely revered Jewish Supreme Court justices, both pledged to Zionism above loyalty to country, as members of a secret Zionist organization, the Perishing. By the way, the information on that is from a Jewish scholarly journal. And the author of the article, the main article that provides that information, is Dr. Sarah Schmidt, an Israeli professor at a mainstream Israeli university. My book is over half citations, so everything that I say, people can look at the citations and determine the accuracy for themselves. The Counterpunch article goes on to say, if Justice Louis Brandeis was instrumental, as the evidence suggests, in persuading President Wilson to betray his 1916 campaign promise and declare war on Germany as a quid pro quo for the Balfour Declaration, a decision costing over 116,000 American lives, double those killed in Vietnam. This is explosive information indeed. In addition, the article says, Alison's research indicates that future Justice Felix Frankfurter was instrumental in preventing an early World War I peace treaty with the Ottomans that would have obviated the Balfour Declaration, terminating or seriously restricting the Zionist movement and the havoc that followed. This information had been published elsewhere, but remained obscure. Some would like to keep it obscure, unquote. That's from Counterpunch. Now to get on to the second half of my presentation, the prequel to Gaza, to what's going on in Gaza today that my fellow panelists will discuss in far greater detail. It's important to understand, as my colleague Ziyad will discuss, that Israel was created through a massive ethnic cleansing of the population that had lived on that land for generations. When the political Zionist movement began, the population of Palestine, what then later became called Israel, was 80% Muslim, about 15% Christian, and a little bit under 5% Jewish, all living together in peace. When Israel was established through its founding war, it expelled at least 750,000 people, perhaps even more than that. A significant portion of those individuals pushed out very violently. There were a number of massacres of Palestinian villages, went to Gaza. To the population of Gaza today, almost 2 million people, at least 70%, I've seen some reports that may be as high as 80% of Gazans are refugee families who were pushed out from their land in what is now called Israel. This is extremely important to understand. The border, as it's called, between Israel and Gaza, the fence where the recent, about over 2 months worth of nonviolent demonstrations by Gazans, that is not an international border. That was an armistice line, and it was always made clear it was not an external border. Israel has never set its borders. When it established its state by choice, it never wrote a constitution, and it never set its borders. So when someone from Gaza may attempt to go across that fence and return to his or her ancestral home, that individual has every right to do that. It is an internationally recognized right that all refugees, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity, have the right to return to their homes. Now I'll get to the final part of my talk, which is to describe what Gaza was like when I visited there in early 2001. I went as a freelance reporter. I was not part of a delegation. I had nobody, no organization sponsoring my trip or showing me around or helping me whatsoever. I traveled over there as a freelance reporter to see for myself what was going on. This was in February and March of 2001, before a number of months before 9/11. So I'll show you, if I can do the technical part of this presentation properly, I'll show you the type of the pictures that I took from that trip. I saw at that time that Palestinians already were being kept in small prisons within larger prisons. They often couldn't go from one town to the next town over to visit their grandchildren, to visit their son, to visit their mother, to go to the hospital, as I've mentioned, to go to work, to go to school. There were checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints, at that time in Gaza itself, preventing Palestinians from passing, controlling their movements within Gaza. I also saw that parts of Gaza were being shelled nightly. I was in some of those parts. These pictures now are from the Tufa area of Khan Yunis in Gaza. Let me see if this is going to work. This is what Gaza looked like in February and March of 2001. These are photos I took. This was a place that had a family, these were family homes. This is where, Palestinian men, women, and children were living. This is what was being done to it by Israeli forces in 2001. Here's a close-up. Here's one of the homes that had been full of a family. I saw some homes where Palestinians were still living in the center of their home. They had mattresses on the floor where they were hoping they were safer and that they and their children would not be killed by Israeli shelling. Here's another picture. Here's the Tufa area of Khan Yunis in Gaza. Crowds of people would come up to me. I was the only American journalist there. They would smile at me and welcome me. They were pleased that an American journalist had come to see what was going on. And as you look at this picture, I'm hoping that this is showing on the screen properly. As you look at this picture, you'll see that massive devastation to this area. And this is before a single rocket had been fired from Gaza. No rockets yet had been fired. This was a number of years before Hamas became the leadership of Gaza. The US media consistently tell Americans that Israel is supposedly defending itself from rockets and from Hamas. Well, this is what it looked like before Hamas was there and before Gaza and before rockets had been fired. I remember seeing children. They would bring to me piles of spent bullets. People would want to show me every bullet hole in their homes. I saw this had been a 100-year-old stand of date palms. The livelihood for a huge extended family was now flattened and destroyed. I saw ancient olive groves were destroyed. I talked to farmers who had farmed there forever. For generation upon generation, these farmers had been on that land in Gaza, and now they were destroyed. I wondered what they would do. How does a farmer feed his family when even his orchards are destroyed, when his whole farm is gone? I saw a people and a land being destroyed already in early 2001. This didn't start last year. This didn't start in 2006. This is 2001, and of course there have been many invasions before that time as well. I also saw on that trip and on my trips since many children who have been shot by Israeli forces. Often they're shot in the back, running away. Some have been shot in the stomach. I've seen Palestinian children who were shot in the teeth, in the chest, in the leg, you name it. I saw one little boy in Gaza on that trip who was brain dead. He'd been shot in the head, as many children have. If you go to our website, we have a list of the children who have been killed and their cause of death. So this is some of what was being seen. I'm going to try now to go back to maybe stop the screen share for a period of time. If I can remember how you do that. I guess I've forgotten how to do that.
You again now, Alison. Go ahead.
Okay, are you seeing me now?
Yes, you're coming through fine.
Okay, great. So this is for the situation in Gaza, even before the recent events of what was going on. A population is increasingly desperate. I expect my other panelists will be giving some of the information about the restrictive policies in which Israel has enacted a blockade against Gaza that's gone on now for, I believe, 11 years. Children's growth is being stunted. There's malnutrition. All of this began quite a few years ago. It's extremely important to know that. Also, if I can go back for a last little bit, I will try to share a little bit more about the rockets, because that's, of course, one of the main talking points that Israel consistently uses in defending their actions, and the talking points that the Israeli media consistently repeat. I'll skip my pictures. This is Gaza when I went back more recently in about 2010, places that had been full of families when I was there before. But let me just tell a little bit about Palestinian rockets. Most people are never told that these are small, often short-range projectiles, homemade projectiles that do almost no damage whatsoever. In the entire time that they've been used, thousands of rockets have been fired from Gaza. They've killed approximately 30 people. If you add mortars, I think it comes to 47. These are the number of Gazans that had been killed as of several years ago. Now the number is quite a bit higher. In terms of children, Americans hear about Israeli children who have been killed. We usually see their names, their parents. We grieve for those children, as we should, but we almost never learn about the Palestinian children killed during that same period of time. It's my view that we should be informed about all of those children, that we should care about all of those children, and that we should demand that Israel stop using our money the way it's using. And I feel that we should demand that the US stop giving our tax money to Israel. It's time to bring a stop to this violence and for Americans to stop funding it. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this panel and give information that I was not allowed to give at the Left Forum. And now I'd like to turn my time over to my fellow colleagues to tell more about Gaza. Thanks very much.
And before we go to our next speaker, Ziyad, I just wanted to make it a little more clear, friends, that this panel is actually a panel that was put together exclusively by Alison and her organization, and is an allied panel with our effort here in the Deep Truth Conference. So this is the panel that If Americans Knew was intending to present at the Left Forum, and you're hearing what the Left Forum apparently didn't want you to hear. We're going to go now to Ziyad Shihadah, and Ziyad was born in Gaza, in a camp in Gaza. He is the son of Nakba survivors, and lived also through the Six-Day War before he relocated to Saudi Arabia as a displaced person. He's lived in the Palestinian diaspora. He came to the United States and got a degree in civil engineering at the University of Illinois. And he works as an advocate for peace and justice for the Palestinian people. Ziyad and his wife, Kathy, also work for equality and justice for other marginalized groups through their civic organization, Unity in Diversity. Ziyad, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Hi. Am I on? Hi.
You're ready to go. We're listening.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, my name is Ziyad Shihadah. I'm so happy that Deep Truth has given us a platform to talk about Gaza. I also appreciate being a part of the If Americans Knew panel. I'm honored to be with Alison Weir, who has done so much for the Palestinian people. Thank you, Alison. You could read a book about the history of Palestine or some articles about current events in Gaza, and you would learn a lot, but they would not help you understand the Palestinian heart. I'm going to take you on my family's journey, which is really just like thousands of other journeys by thousands of other Palestinian families. 70 to 80% of the people who live in Gaza today are from families who are really just like mine. I was born in Deir al-Balah refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, 1960. I consider myself a Palestinian first, and I identify with the people of Gaza. but I don't presume that put myself in the same category with them. They live under the harsh reality that I only see from a distance. I hope that when you hear their story, you will understand how our collective journey has shaped us into the people we are today. Although the people of Gaza are desperate, they are determined as a people who want to embrace life. They are willing to face snipers' bullets because they care that much about justice. I find that inspiring and humbling. My family has been in Palestine for hundreds of years at least. This book is called Historical Geography of Palestine, Transjordan, and Southern Syria in the late 16th century. It is based on census registers in 1596 by the Ottoman Empire. 1596. It lists all of the towns, their populations, religions, taxes paid, and more. My family's town, Ibdis, IBDIS, is listed, so it's at least 400 years old. Slide number 1, please. This is Fatima, my grandmother, my mom's mom. She was born in Ibdis around 1900. Slide number 2, please. Here is my grandfather on my dad's side, Mahmoud. My mom and dad and my oldest brother, Muhammad, were also born in Ibdis. Slide number 3, please. Sometimes I picture my mom and dad as kids living in Ibdis. I'm sure they played and worked like kids anywhere in the world, and their parents dreamed of a bright future. While they were growing up in Ibdis, the World Zionist Organization in Europe was persuading Jews to move to Palestine using the slogan, "A land without people for a people without a land." After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Great Britain occupied Palestine, and for years it helped the Zionist cause and undermined the native Palestinians. My mom told me that in the 1940s, Arab Palestinians were not allowed to own a gun. Her brother had one that he kept hidden in his house. The Brits found out and put him in jail. She saw this happen with her own eyes. For some mysterious reason, the British were helping to disarm the Palestinians and arm the Jewish residents. Over 300,000 Jewish immigrants came in the 1920s and 30s. By 1939, 30% of the population was Jewish. Palestinians knew about the persecution of Jews in Europe and welcomed Jewish refugees to Palestine, but it became clear that the Jewish population was planning to take over. There were riots all over Palestine. Britain gave up and handed the mess over the United Nations. In November 1947, the UN came up with a partition plan, giving 56% of it to the Jews. The Palestinians rejected the plan. The Arab world warned that there would be a fight. The UN partition plan essentially took away Palestine's right to self-determination, even though self-determination is in the UN Charter. Immediately, in November 1947, months before the declaration of the State of Israel, the Zionist army began taking over villages all over Palestine, 300 of them before the war, which started the next May, and 118 more during the war. My family's town, Ibdis, was attacked the first time in February 1948, before the war. The men of the village managed to fight off the Zionist army. At midnight on May 14, 1948, the British occupying forces went home, and the Jewish People's Council proclaimed the creation of the State of Israel. On May 15th, the neighboring Arab countries went to war with the new state, as they had promised. Zionist leaders had anticipated this war for several years and contacted wealthy people all over the world, including people in the government in the United States, Great Britain, and some Eastern European countries. They convinced them to finance and smuggle in 10 tanks, dozens of warplanes, tens of thousands of machine guns and rifles, and tens of millions of rounds of ammunition. He also had an underground factory that manufactured ammunition and submachine guns. On the other hand, the Palestinians had almost no military capacity. When Israel won the war, it wasn't a miracle from God. It was superior military capability. That's it. Abdus was attacked again in July 1948. During the war, most of the men of the village, including my dad, had left to join the Egyptian army. The village was captured. My mom told me that during the evacuation of Abdus, one of my uncles was walking with his children, and his wife was maybe about 100 yards behind him, carrying a baby. An Israeli plane flew overhead and dropped a barrel bomb. My aunt and the baby were hit, and there was nothing left of them. Just like that. This was not a one-time incident. This is a pattern that continues to this day. Israel shamelessly kills innocent people. This is part of their history and ours. By the end of the war, Israel had captured 78% of historic Palestine. The Palestinians ended up with what we now call the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled from their homes. That's 85% of the population. Most of them would never return, including the people of my village, Abdus. The Israeli government demolished the villages and built new Jewish-only towns or planted forests or crops. They didn't want the Arabs to have a place to come back to. Slide 4, please. Our family recently went to the site of Abdus. I used my iPhone to find it. It's farmland now. Actually, watermelons, you can see. Slide number 5, please. There is nothing left but remnants of a well and some stones that were probably a cemetery. My parents and my brother, and later 2 more brothers, spent several years, most of the 50s, moving around, staying with Bedouins or wherever they could. They would do farm work in exchange for shelter and food. Eventually, they came to Deir al-Balah town, a small town with a UN refugee camp. Deir al-Balah was the smallest camp out of 8 in Gaza Strip, with 30,000 refugees. Slide number 6, please. Our family got a little cinder block room like this. One room with a corrugated steel roof and a cement floor. We had no electricity, running water, or sewage pipes. There was an outhouse every few blocks and a water pump. In the winter, the outhouse was the warmest place, and my brother Ibrahim used to take a blanket and go sleep there. True story. The UN gave us food and clothes and started schools for us. I loved school. I got my first pair of shoes, flip-flops, when I was 6 because I was old enough to go to school. My dad went to Saudi Arabia in the late 1950s to work. He sent us a little money each month. I grew up without dad for most of the first 7 years of my life. I had a baby sister named Bahia, but she got the chicken pox and died when she was only 6 months old. My dad never even got to see her. For 6 months in 1956-57, during the Suez Crisis, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip. Then in 1967, hostility was high between Israel and Egypt. Gaza was under Egyptian administration, so Israel considered us the enemy too. We would hear a siren and we knew the Israeli planes were coming, so we would hide in ditches. I used to help dig the ditches. Even though I was only 6 years old, I got to live through the Six-Day War. By the end, Israel controlled all of the remaining Palestinian lands. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank were now fully subject to Israel. And East Jerusalem, which we wanted to be the capital of Palestine someday, was annexed. My dad applied to a special program and we were allowed to move to Saudi Arabia. But my mom had to sign a paper relinquishing her rights to everything she was leaving behind. Not that there was that much to leave. We were powerless. If we stayed, our life would be full of hardship. If we left, we would lose our rights and our identity. This gives you an idea of the background and baggage that most Palestinians carry with us. Every action we take is built on our history and our hope for the future, or our despair. Today, there are at least 8 million Palestinian refugees living outside the historic Palestine. Many of us are still hoping to go back home someday. People have always said, just go live in a different Arab country and make a new home. Give up on Palestine. Let me explain why this is just not a reasonable idea. Over 70% of Gazans are refugees. They came from villages and towns like Abdus that are in what is now known as Israel. Most of them are farmers and country people. Their families have lived on their land for hundreds of years. Their pride and identity and wealth are tied to the land. These people would literally die for their land. When they lost the land, they lost everything. They felt disgraced. That's not something you outgrow quickly. It's part of every breath. I feel that they were robbed of the opportunity to defend themselves properly, especially by the British occupier, which left them in a hostile environment with no way to defend themselves. When Gazans talk about the right of return, which was guaranteed by the United Nations 70 years ago, but never happened, they are talking about the deepest longing in their hearts. Most Gazans don't care about revenge. They just want to touch their soil again, sit under their fig trees, feel like they are home. They miss their lands. I miss it too. For the generation of Palestinians who were exiled in 1948, like my parents, they know exactly what they lost, and they are tortured with thoughts that they should have fought harder. They feel that they failed their land and their people. My generation does not know the loss in the same way, but we know the stories. We have the early memories. We see the sadness in our parents' faces. I saw my mom and dad both get old and die before their time because they were sick and exhausted from struggling every single day. Our children's generation feels some of that pain and sometimes anger or helplessness or deep sadness. Many Gazan children don't know what it feels like to have a full stomach or a house without bullet holes. Their fathers are out of work or in jail or dead. They know the smell of tear gas and taste of contaminated water. Many have lived their whole lives under blockade. If it sounds grim, that's because it is grim. But we don't feel sorry for ourselves. Palestinians are proud people. Before the Zionist project started, Palestine was full of culture and industry, and its people were highly educated, especially in the cities. There was also a lot of westernization and great openness. The farmers, the country people lived a simple life and loved their land. Please slide 7 to 11. Alan, you can just scroll through the pictures. Here are some photos I found online on the Australian War Memorial Archive website. They show a day in the early 1940s when a group of men from an Australian training outpost were invited to a local Palestinian village feast. By the way, the name of this village was Ibtis. Both of my grandmothers probably cooked this meal. My mom told me many years ago about this event, and I was so surprised and happy that someone took pictures. The point is that Palestinians were and still are intelligent and peace-loving people. Zionists have always, till today, portrayed us as uncivilized or violent, but that's a complete fabrication. In 2008, 2012, and 2014, Israel attacked Gaza. Each time there was great loss of life, mostly civilians and children. In addition, factories, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure were destroyed. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. Hundreds of thousands lost their homes. Then Israel refused to allow the people to rebuild. They have refused to let food aid and medical supplies in. There is no clear water and electricity, only a few hours a day. Israel's blockade is against international law and has been condemned many times by human rights organizations and the United Nations, but nothing is happening. The UN Humanitarian Affairs Office says that the Israeli blockade on Gaza, which is in its 12th year now, is the main cause for the high unemployment rate, which is over 43%, and the poverty rate. 80% of Gazans live below the poverty line. It is not surprising that depression and suicide have become a huge problem, especially for young people. Many of those who attempt suicide are highly educated, university graduates. They have no hope of finding a job, no hope of leaving, and they feel there is no point in living. These are the best of the best in Gaza, and we are losing them. I'm proud to say that literacy rates in the occupied Palestinian territories are some of the highest in the world. Even with the hardship, a college education is a high priority. Gaza has 18 accredited colleges, and over half of the students are female. This is a highly educated, progressive society. Israel and Israel supporters try to discredit Gazans by stereotyping us Hamas followers. You know that in the last few months, during the Great March of Return, Israel snipers have killed about 125 unarmed protesters, including medical personnel, journalists, people who were praying, people with disabilities, and even children. They also shot at the ambulances and hospital tents. At least 500 Palestinians have been shot in the head, and 13,000 have been injured. American politicians don't care. Why? Because they think the protests are led by Hamas, and they claim most of the dead were Hamas militants. They don't know what they are talking about. I'm going to give you a crash course right now, Hamas 101. Slide 12, please. Palestinians always wanted to resist Israel and get their land back. So in 1964, they founded the PLO, political party that was willing to use armed resistance. It was led by Yasser Arafat and Fatah. At times, their tactics were ruthless. After 1967, Arafat was exiled to Jordan, then Lebanon, and then Tunisia. He could not run an armed group from that distance. So the PLO turned towards diplomacy and even recognized the State of Israel in 1988. Slide 13, please. Then Arafat made more concessions in 1993, which essentially gave Israel control over 82% of the West Bank. Slide 14, please. Today, 600,000 Israeli settlers live in Palestinian land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Palestinians are essentially living under apartheid. Yasser Arafat's diplomacy did not do any good for us, only for Israel. The people of Gaza did not want more concessions. They wanted to resist, and Hamas did too. So when there was an election in 2006, the PLO was out and Hamas was in. Israel punished the whole population of Gaza for electing Hamas by imposing a brutal blockade. Israel expected that would make Gazans miserable enough to overthrow Hamas. But the people are more dedicated to resistance than ever. According to the international law, long-term occupation is illegal. Gaza has been under occupation since 1967. Some will argue that the occupation ended in 2005, but Israel is still in control. By definition, as long as Gaza's government does not have full and free exercise of sovereignty, the occupation is still in place. International law also says that organized resistance against occupation is legal. Israel acts like occupation is legal and the resistance is illegal, but it's the opposite. Even armed resistance is legal. The protesters in the Great March of Return are unarmed, but even if they carried weapons, their action would be legal. It takes courage to resist when snipers are taking aim. It's not culture of hatred and death that makes Gazan protest. It is a culture of determination and willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for a better future. People fight against injustice every day all over the world, and that doesn't make them terrorists. Israel and American politicians tell us that Hamas is pure evil. The day after Israel snipers killed 60 Gazans, Nikki Haley told the UN Secretary Council, "Make no mistake, Hamas is pleased with the results from yesterday." Nobody in Gaza is pleased when Palestinians are killed. Her statement goes back to the belief that Palestinians are monsters and we worship death. Is Gaza swarming with Hamas militants, really? Ready to wipe Israel off the map? It is ridiculous to believe that just 2% of Gaza's population, 40,000 Hamas militants, could destroy the mighty Israel with its hundreds of thousands of soldiers and powerful military weapons and equipment. They even have nuclear weapons, for God's sake. It is equally ridiculous and insulting to hear Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, Israel must protect its sovereign borders, and then using snipers to kill innocent people, innocent demonstrators who are still inside Gaza. This issue did not start when Trump moved the US embassy. The blockade of Gaza has been gone for 11 years. The occupation started 50 years ago. The State of Israel was born on Palestinian land 70 years ago, and the British started dealing unjustly with the Palestinians 100 years ago. We have been resisting all along. We have been fighting injustice for 100 years. The bottom line here is the world needs to respect the Palestinian resistance, especially in Gaza. Their resistance did not start with Hamas. Actually, Hamas came out of the resistance. They came out of the first intifada that started in Gaza in 1987 and went till 1993. At the end, I thank you for listening, and please keep this topic alive. Learn and share our story. We need people to care and get involved. When there are enough of us, we can bring about a genuine just solution. You keep our hope alive, especially the people of Gaza. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ziyad. We're now going to hear from Samir Salem. Samir
Hello?
is, yes. Can you hear me, Samir?
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
Very good. Samir is a young activist, filmmaker, entrepreneur, working toward social justice. He was raised in a multicultural family in a diverse blue-collar neighborhood in Chicago. And this upbringing allowed Samir to form a unique perspective on his identity with a broad range of people, cultures, and ideologies. Samir has been making films and working with Alison Weir's organizations, If Americans Knew, as a cinematographer and motion picture with a motion picture company, which is defined by his blue-collar attitude that he was raised with. Samir, let's welcome you to the Deep Truth Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Everyone out there, thank you for listening and for watching my videos. I want to start out first with two quotes. These are quotes from Ilan Pappé, noted Israeli historian. This first quote was in September 2006. Incremental genocide is taking place in Gaza. He wrote that article about the first Israeli massacre after the disengagement plan, which was 2006, called Operation Summer Rain and Operation Autumn Clouds. The Israelis massacred, I think, about 484 Palestinians, 50 or so children. 8 years later, in another article, Ilan Pappé wrote, 2014, Israel's present assault on Gaza indicates that this policy continues unabated. That was about Operation Protective Edge, which was an Israeli massacre that killed 2,200 Palestinians, hundreds and hundreds of children. Also, I think it was 1,800 civilians. 4 years later, how many have they killed now? A lot of you already have been watching the Great Return March and been seeing the numbers go up. Well, I was initially going to start with a video showing the incremental genocide, basically a history of Gaza up until now. Ziyad gave you a lot of history of that, and also myself and another filmmaker at IAK are still working on that video, and so hopefully you guys out there will follow If Americans Knew on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and you'll be able to see that video next week. Another thing that we do at IAK is we have this website called IsraelPalestineTimeline.org, and that catalogs all of the deaths, Palestinians killed by Israelis, Israelis killed by Palestinians since 2000. The numbers are, of course, way skewed, but it's just a catalog it's not just numbers. We want to know who these people are. There's a life behind every name and every number. And so a lot of what I do is showing the story behind the death. And so if we can show a few of these videos now, I'd like you to meet a few of the personal stories from Gaza. Alan, can you play IAK1, please?
Hi, this is Alan, the technical producer. We had a crash here, so that's why we had to go to a second video. If you refresh your browser page, just refresh your browser page, and you will see a new window right underneath the old window. And then hit the go thing on that one, and you'll see where we are right now. So refresh your browser, and then hit the arrow again. It's the window that's underneath the window that we were watching before the when it stalled. Okay, we're going back to the video.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to close it so I can see the video.
The videos at the end.
All right, well, thank you for watching those. Those are some of the personal stories. This next video I want you to watch is puts more of the context of what's happening in Gaza into a 4-minute video. So Alan, if you can play IAK2, that would be great. Thank you. Well, thanks for watching that. I hope it was informative. And since we were talking about a lot of children being targeted, one thing I want to leave you with is, action items. If this is something that you want to continue following in the news, please follow us on our Facebook and our Twitter. If Americans Knew, you'll be able to see more videos that I create, also more articles and videos from other of our team members. And moving forward, if the best thing I think we can do right now for the people out there is talk to your politicians, see where they stand. There's a specific bill called HR 4391. It's in the House of Representatives, and it's called the Promoting Human Rights by Ending Israeli Military Detention of Palestinian Children Act. That's something that you can call your congressperson and find out if they support and urge them to support, or find out why they don't support. And with my last few minutes, I don't want to use that for my own voice. I prefer to let some people from Gaza send their message to you directly. So Alan, if you can please play IAK4, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Wissam Abu Diab. I was born and raised up in Gaza Strip in one of the refugee camps called Deir al-Balah refugee camp. I lived there for 18 years.
People tend to remember us Palestinians only in times of wars and crises. They tend to refer to us only as numbers of murderers, injured, and victims of wars and assaults. They expect us to wear those scars on our bodies. We might inherit these scars internally, but that's not the only thing that we carry. We carry thus strength and the right to go back to our lands. Palestinians from all over the world have one goal, and we all seek to reach that goal in many different ways. And for me, Palestine is my identity.
I returned back to Gaza right after the Israeli war in 2014 and was totally shocked and amazed of what happened to the community there and what happened to the people. They were totally internally destroyed. Can you imagine a life with 4 hours a day of electricity, which you don't know even when? And more than that, pollution. There's no space, people cannot go out. It's totally blockade. People cannot even think what's behind these walls. Life was really miserable. For 2 years, I was really in a trauma. I couldn't understand, I couldn't feel what life is.
We have a horrific situation and tons of struggles whenever it comes to what's going on in Gaza now, and whether if you want to talk about the electricity, the water, the fuel, the gas, the concrete, etc. But now particularly I want to talk about the right of traveling. But Gaza is considered to be a very small closed jail whenever it comes to traveling. There are a lot of people in desperate need for medical treatments and simply can't get out of Gaza. And if you want to talk about the amount of goods that can get in and out, those are tightly controlled.
Dear world, please give me your undivided attention for less than 1 minute if humanity means the least to you. My name is Ahmed and I'm a Palestinian currently living in the Gaza Strip. For the past century, Gaza has been nothing but a non-stop real-effect horror movie. Signs of a decent life have been and still are vanishing rapidly. I'm talking water supply, electricity, health services, salaries, job vacancies, the right to travel in and out, you name it. And to top it all off, we get blown up with $1 million fighter aircrafts and artilleries every couple of years. The people can't be with it no more. That's why most are taking part of the Great March of Return, protesting at the border in an attempt to appeal to the world, demanding the least rights any human could ask of. We ask pity of no one. We just want the world to take a thorough look on what has been and is still going on in Gaza. Something's got to change. Civilian lives cannot be taken or seen as collateral damage for this mess. Thank you and be safe.
A week from now, we started a peaceful protest on the borders for the aim to go back to our occupied original lands, and unfortunately a lot of people died throughout this protest. Many of them were shot in the back, many of them were shot hundreds of meters from the borders, many of them were journalists, many of them were paramedics, and many of them were children. Israeli forces are using the most horrible, atrocious, vicious, brutal weapons against men, women, and children. And the war sits by.
What I want to say is, wherever we go, we still love Palestine. These people, my fellow people in Palestine, they love it. We love it, and they deserve to have a life. They did not, and they don't dream with more than a life, just like a normal life. That's all what they want to do. Please, please give them the chance. They deserve it. Viva la Palestina.
Well, that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Samir. Very powerful footage. Maybe we'll have some time to talk about it after Kathy speaks, but the concept of cowardice comes to mind when you see such powerfully armed people against unarmed people. Seems like it must be very deep in that culture in order for it to happen on that scale. Okay, let's go now to our next speaker. Kathy Shihadah, is your camera turned on, Kathy? I'm not seeing you.
There it is.
Okay.
I think it's on now.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I assume you are married to Ziyad?
Yes.
Well, there you go. Congratulations. It'd be very interesting and nice to hear you speak.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Shihadah, and I live in Illinois with my husband, Ziyad, whom you have already met, Palestinian refugee. We've been married for 32 years. And during most of that time, Ziyad rarely talked about his childhood. He focused on family and work, and he chased the American dream like a good American man. A couple of years ago, he reconnected with his roots, although it was very painful for him. We have been working together ever since then, advocating for Palestine and Palestinians, mostly through educational forums. I'd like to talk today about the roadblocks that are getting in the way of the truth about the Palestine issue, particularly what's going on in Gaza right now. The situation there has been misrepresented, underrepresented by mainstream media. Our government is dedicated to withholding justice and even recognition of the issue. And Israel and its supporters are opposing international advocacy and silencing voices that speak for Gazans in their humanitarian crisis. Everybody so far has been talking about the Great March of Return, but I'm just going to give you a little summary, especially highlighting 3 important days of that return so far. On March 30th of this year, the people of Gaza began a grassroots mass protest near Gaza's border with Israel. It took the form of a nonviolent, unarmed demonstration in which the people demanded their right to be heard, to be freed from a 50-year occupation and an 11-year blockade, and to be allowed to exercise their right under international humanitarian law and United Nations Resolution 194 to return to their land. They've protested every Friday since then, and also on Monday, May 14th, Nakba Day, the day when they commemorate the catastrophe, the day when Israel was born on Palestinian land. That was the same day the U.S. Embassy opened, the new U.S. Embassy opened in Jerusalem. Another important day in this sequence was May 29th, when militants in Gaza shot off a number of rockets toward Israel. This was the first serious move against Israel. Israel knew about those protests in advance, and they knew the protesters would be unarmed, but Israel chose to place trained snipers at the border who have now killed at least 124 Palestinians, and injured something like 13,000. Some of the dead, as we have heard, were medical personnel, journalists. Some people were shot while they were praying, some while they were running away or helping other injured people. Israeli soldiers shot tear gas canisters into medical tents and family tents. They even shot at ambulances. You've heard about this. I expect our audience is better informed than average, and at least you've heard from this panel about this event. According to Grant Smith on antiwar.com, slide 1, please, Alan, more than 80% of American adults polled didn't even know about the killing of 60 Palestinians in Gaza on the day of the US Embassy opening. How is that possible? Mainstream media has taken a beating in the last year, allegedly delivering fake news. When it comes to reporting on Israel, that accusation is true. We are not getting the full and accurate story. Reporters are not seeking out the Palestinian perspective or asking hard questions about Israeli narratives. This is not rocket science. People on one side of the fence have slingshots and kites. People on the other side have snipers. People on one side are being shot and killed. People on the other side have had essentially zero casualties. The people of Gaza are protesting the terrible life they are living because of the Israeli blockade. This blockade has been in place since 2007 and has put people of Gaza under tremendous pressure. They don't have enough food or medicine to take care of their population. They can't get what they need to farm or raw materials for industry. They're not able to generate enough electricity or treat their sewage or purify their water. They're dealing with very high unemployment rate, a high poverty rate, and a lot of anger and hopelessness. On the first day of the demonstrations, March 30th, 16 Palestinians were killed by Israeli snipers. Here is the headline from MSNBC. Slide 2, please. 16 unarmed protesters were killed, and the big news of the day is that the Israeli ambassador is calling to condemn the Palestinian leadership. Look at this statement from Middle East envoy Jason Greenblatt the same day, slide 3. We condemn the leaders and protesters who call for violence or who send protesters, including children, to the fence, knowing that they may be injured or killed. The problem is, leaders and protesters were not calling for violence. And why is there no condemnation of the snipers? Well, this is how mainstream media has been handling news about Israel and Palestine for years. Alison Weir has been reporting on this for years. Here are just a few samples. Back in 2004, the Associated Press ran 9 articles that featured Israeli children's deaths. Actually, 8 Israeli children were killed. 1 was reported on twice. They also ran 27 articles on Palestinian children's deaths. But here's the thing. 179 Palestinians were killed that year. 152 of them were never even mentioned. Between September 29th, 2000 and December 31st, 2005, the Wall Street Journal published 5 times more op-eds by Israelis than by Palestinians. In 2003, it published 28 by Israelis and only 1 by a Palestinian. Early this year, Alison and I studied Associated Press again. We pick on AP because more than half of the world's population reads Associated Press content every day. Here's what we found. And by the way, you can get these reports on ifamericans.com. During the first 5 weeks of 2018, 2 Israelis and 11 Palestinians were killed. But again, AP's coverage was skewed. Headlines reported on Israeli deaths at a rate nearly 4 times greater than they reported on Palestinian deaths. The articles on the Israeli deaths averaged 3 times longer as well. We found that Palestinian victims were described with impersonal, often negative words like armed protester, instigators, and protesters who were hurling massive amounts of rocks. But Israeli victims were personalized in AP reports. One was characterized as a 29-year-old father of 4. In another article, there was a description of an attempted rescue. Immense efforts were made to save the man's life, but his wounds were too severe. But wait, there's more bias in the way AP reported on the deaths. AP reports on Israeli deaths included statements by high-ranking Israeli officials. Of course, these statements passed along the Israeli narrative. For example, Israel will do everything possible in order to apprehend the despicable murderer. And Hamas praises the killers, and Palestinian Authority laws will provide them financial rewards. Look no further to why there is no peace. On the other hand, AP reports rarely included any statement by a Palestinian official, even though plenty of statements condemning the killing of Palestinians were readily available. AP reports regularly skipped details that would put Israel in a bad light, like the times the IDF soldiers refused to let Palestinian ambulances pass, or the time they shot and killed the wrong person during a manhunt. And none of the AP reports on these deaths mentioned the word occupied or occupation. Without the context of the occupation, the reader has a significant gap in his understanding of the conflict. AP normally provides excellent, unbiased reporting. It needs to apply the same standards to its coverage of Israel and Palestine. I have spoken to AP Vice President and Standards Editor John Danaszewski about this, and he claims he's looking into it. I hope Associated Press will be the first mainstream media outlet to start covering the Palestinian issue accurately and fairly. In a Consortium News interview, Max Blumenthal discussed the death of Palestinian photojournalist Yasser Mertaja, a founder of the press agency iMedia in Gaza. Yasser was widely respected for his work. He died in the line of duty, shot by a sniper, even though he was wearing a vest marked press. Fun fact, it's a war crime to kill a journalist. When there was an uproar about Yasser's death, Israel came out with the story that he was a Hamas spy. They offered absolutely no evidence, just a statement. Slide 5, please. And the Washington Post, one of the most respected newspapers in the country, reprinted that in a headline, even though there was no proof. Why was there was no proof? Why was the Washington Post so sloppy? Well, at least they acknowledged that Yasser was dead. Slide 6. That's better than NBC did. They weren't even sure that somebody was killed. Israeli officials make statements for Western media consumption, and the name of Hamas comes up regularly. For them, Hamas is synonymous with terrorist. Hamas members are inhuman, willing to send their own people to their death. With the stage set like this, and the mainstream media's ear attuned to this viewpoint only, it's no surprise that even though Hamas was not the organizer of the Great March of Return, its name was all over the headlines. Speaking of media control, if we can go to slide 8, there is a bill in the Knesset right now, the legislative body in Israel, that would make it illegal to photograph or film IDF soldiers. Do they have something to hide? All right, enough talk about mainstream media. Let's talk about government officials for a while. First of all, I want to point out that our president has not acknowledged the situation in Gaza, not at all, not a word. That's just annoying and crude. It also sends a signal to the world that America couldn't care less about Palestinian lives, the injustice that Israel is perpetrating. Coming from the world's superpower, this is practically a death sentence for Palestinians. Because if the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world doesn't care, then why should anyone else? The Trump administration has reduced US funding for the UN Relief Works Agency, which is in charge of Palestinian refugees. They've reduced it by 84%. About 70% of the population in Gaza are refugees, and because of the blockade, they need that aid. Why is the US taking such an anti-Palestinian, pro-Israel position? Without going into detail about the Israel lobby, which is the second most powerful lobby in Washington, right behind the NRA, let's just say that any congressperson who takes care of Israel is taken care of by Israel's supporters, and anyone who doesn't will probably be job hunting before long. The president has Israel supporters all around him, and he counts on votes and their money, so he has to keep them happy. You'll hear the same rhetoric from our administration to hear from Israeli leaders. Hamas equals terrorism. After the May 14th massacre of 60 Palestinians, UN ambassador from Israel, Danny Danon, released this statement. Slide 9. Condemn Hamas for the war crimes they commit. Not only does Hamas incite tens of thousands of Palestinians to breach the border and hurt Israeli citizens, but Hamas also deliberately endangers Palestinian citizens. The murder of Israeli citizens or deaths of the people of Gaza, each one of them is a desirable outcome for Hamas. Every casualty on the border is a victim of Hamas war crimes. Every death is a result of Hamas terror activity, and these casualties are solely Hamas's responsibility. Dannon's statement is full of inaccuracies. Hamas did not incite. Palestinians did not breach the border. Israeli citizens were not hurt, and the death of anyone is not a desirable outcome for Hamas. His statement is also illogical, given that Israel was the one killing people, but he went unchallenged, to the point that his statement appeared in an op-ed in CNN. Israel killed 120 Palestinians and walked away blameless. The same day, Israeli spokespeople accused Hamas of brutal terror attacks, calls for genocide of Jews, quest to destroy Israel, and use of children as human shields, and said that Hamas is an organization that sanctifies murder and death, that for years, yesterday included, has been intent on harming millions of Israelis. This was the message from every Israeli source, so it's no surprise that Israel's best friend and benefactor had the exact same message. The White House press room stated, "We believe Hamas is responsible for these tragic deaths, and we want it stopped." The semantic creativity it takes to stand with Israel in these awkward, indefensible moments reminds me of a 2014 statement by Secretary of State John Kerry. Israel was in the middle of pulverizing Gaza in Operation Protective Edge when it ran out of mortar rounds, and the US opened our stockpile for its use. Kerry was asked what he thought about Palestinian death toll, which was very high. His answer was cleverly crafted. Slide 10, please. "We are deeply concerned about the consequences of Israel's appropriate and legitimate efforts to defend itself." But here's the quote that wins the most impertinent award. This is from David Friedman, the US ambassador to Israel. He represents the United States, mind you. Just a few days ago, he complained that 9 out of 10 news articles about Gaza are critical of Israel, and that's not Israel's fault. It's the journalists' fault. Here's what he said. "You'd think that some journalists would take the time and go and meet with experts and try to understand what could have been done differently or better before they criticize. It was the journalist's job to find alternatives to Israel's use of lethal force." And it's not done yet. Slide 11, please. And then Friedman told the journalists to just keep your mouths shut until you figure it out, because otherwise all you're doing is creating impressions that have no basis in fact. This is stunning. For one day, it was impossible to spin the news in Israel's direction, and our ambassador told the free press to censor itself. Bottom line, our government is disrupting the region, as if it needed any help, by moving the embassy, encouraging the killing of innocent Palestinians, marching in line with the oppressor, censoring the media about Israel, and starving the people who can't afford food because of the Israeli blockade. As long as the US acts like this, we are blockading justice. Let's turn to the United Nations. A day after the 60 Palestinians were killed, Nikki Haley, the US ambassador to the UN, said, "No country in this chamber would act with more restraint than Israel has." Really? Israel deserves a most likely to show restraint award? A few days later came that spurt of rocket attacks in which a couple of Israelis were slightly injured. An empty school building, a kindergarten, got a rocket in its playground. Now Nikki Haley was ready to do something. She wanted the Security Council to condemn Hamas. Slide 12. She was voted down even when she explained that the people of Gaza need protection from Hamas and not from Israel. She continued, "This rocket attack was indiscriminate, aiming to cause as much civilian death and destruction as possible." I looked really hard and I could not find anyone in mainstream American media or politics who pushed back on her statement, even though it's obvious. If Hamas wanted to cause civilian death and destruction, they know how to tell time or look through binoculars. They could have waited till the students arrived at the kindergarten and killed them all. I think Nikki Haley is smart enough to realize that those rockets were intended as a warning. It wasn't a bungled attempt to murder kindergartners. When she supported the oppressor instead of the oppressed, she wasn't just following orders. She was giving the green light for Israel to keep oppressing. She was obstructing justice in the name of the United States. Advocacy groups have been working since 1947 to bring aid and relief to the people of Gaza, but much of the work and fundraising are subverted thanks to Israeli policy. Recently, Israel banned 20 non-government organizations from entering Israel because they have called attention to Israel's bad behavior toward Palestinians. Some of the banned organizations are Jewish Voice for Peace, which has 13,000 members, and the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947. These are highly respected groups that are advocating for the Palestinian people, and Israel is trying to shut them out. This isn't just an assault on free speech. More importantly, it's an assault on the Palestinian people. Another group that's trying to advocate for Palestinians is Breaking the Silence. Slide 13, please. Breaking the Silence is a group of veteran IDF soldiers who have chosen to come forward with testimonies about their experience. They want to expose what is really happening and hopefully bring an end to the occupation. Prime Minister Netanyahu pushed last year for a bill that would shut down the organization. It didn't happen, but this is another obvious attempt to ban free speech and to remove IDF accountability. Let's switch gears and talk about freedom flotillas. Slide 14, please. The International Freedom Flotilla Coalition is a grassroots solidarity movement with people from all over the world working to end the siege of Gaza. Since 2008, over 30 humanitarian aid ships filled with international activists have tried to get to Gaza. 5 of them made it. The rest were forcibly turned back. 1 was rammed and almost sank. A 7-ship flotilla in 2010 was attacked by commandos, and 10 unarmed passengers were killed. Another flotilla is on its way right now. Each of the flotilla ships had been filled with medicine and medical supplies, high-protein baby milk, and other humanitarian supplies, items that Gaza desperately needs. But after those first few ships, they have not been allowed to unload their cargo. Israel caused a humanitarian disaster in Gaza, and Israel is stopping humanitarian relief from coming in. This is indefensible. We can get a glimpse into the mindset of Israeli leaders as they discuss the primary battleground of the conflict at the Gaza border. One spokesperson said that the real battleground is not Gaza, but the American Congress and Europe. I assume he's talking about aid. Another said that Israel's war is really a public relations war and Hamas is winning. Slide 17. He said, the amount of casualties has done us a tremendous disservice. Weren't the casualties really a greater disservice to the Palestinians? But there it is in a nutshell. The reason why Israel needs a low body count is because of optics, not because of sanctity of life. Israel has been manipulating news, changing the subject, blocking humanitarian efforts, and blaming the victim. There is one more troubling subject we need to discuss, because if there's no fix for this one, there is no hope of justice for Palestinians. It's called the new anti-Semitism. Actual anti-Semitism is a terrible thing. We all know that. Jewish a lot of baggage because of persecution. We all know that too. But what some groups have been doing under the guise of self-preservation needs to be called out. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, at times, anti-Semitism has been directed against Jews as individuals. Today, it is directed against Jews as a sovereign people. He's talking about criticism of Israel. Because Israel self-identifies as the Jewish state, the rabbi jumps from criticism of Israel policy to anti-Semitism. By the way, there is something problematic about the official name, the Jewish state, because 20% of the population of Israel are non-Jews, and they become invisible. Back to the new anti-Semitism. We have experienced this personally, my husband and I. When we have given talks about Israel, we've been accused of being anti-Semitic. We gave a presentation on my husband's personal experiences as a Gazan-born refugee, and even that was called anti-Semitic hate speech. After that accusation, in the same breath, we were accused of fueling the next Holocaust. How does that work? Everyone knows that Israel is a Jewish state, so when they hear the criticism of Israel, they might decide to hate all Jews. And the next step, of course, would be Holocaust. No one wants to be labeled as an anti-Semite. So these accusations can cause people to, in the words of David Friedman, just keep their mouths shut. But obviously, if we are silent, Israel will keep killing. The new anti-Semitism police pretend to be balanced. Alan Dershowitz wrote, so long as criticism is comparative, contextual, and fair, it should be encouraged, not disparaged. But when the Jewish nation is the one criticized, the only one criticized for faults that are far worse among other nations, it becomes anti-Semitic. In other words, if I criticize Israel but don't criticize Myanmar, Yemen, and the Congo, I'm anti-Semitic. If I criticize Israel but don't mention terrorist attacks perpetrated by Palestinians, I'm anti-Semitic. I should either talk according to Dershowitz's rules or shut up. That isn't genocide prevention. It's suppression of free speech. And taken to its logical conclusion, if Israeli behavior remains unchallenged long enough, Palestinians may disappear because, as we've seen, Palestinians will always resist injustice, and Israel will not stop occupying and shooting. Israel supporters call the United Nations anti-Semitic. The UN is constantly passing resolutions that condemn Israel's behavior, but not condemning other countries in self-examination and reform. Even Hamas has made it clear that it is not an anti-Semitic organization. Its new charter from 2017 says, Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who now occupy Palestine. Yet it is the Zionists who constantly identify Judaism and the Jews with their own colonial project and illegal entity. Hamas rejects the persecution of any human being and the undermining of his or her rights on nationalist, religious, or sectarian grounds. You can disbelieve Hamas's words if you want to, but look at its actions. It is fighting the occupation and the blockade. That's why the rocket attack that hit the kindergarten hit when it was empty. I don't have time to go into detail now, but one of the targets of this new anti-Semitism program is to shut down the BDS movement, the movement that calls for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel until it changes its policies toward the Palestinians. Some Israeli supporters claim that it is a dangerous movement, the BDS movement, that aims to destroy the Jewish state. It doesn't. And if Israel advocates for Palestinians, if Israel advocates want BDS to go away, they should work on getting the occupation to go away. One more example of the absurdity of the new anti-Semitism, and I'll call it a day. The supposed peace process. Two solutions have been proposed, the two-state solution and the one-state solution. In the two-state solution, there would be a country called Israel and another country called Palestine. The two-state solution is becoming less viable every day because Jewish settlement building keeps going on. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that he cannot support the two-state solution any longer. That leaves the one-state solution. But the Anti-Defamation League, which polices the world on anti-Semitism, has called the one-state solution a more complex manifestation of anti-Semitism because that one state would contain too many Palestinians. It would effectively lead to the demise of the Jewish character of the state. The problems with this position are pretty obvious, and I'm about out of time. I'd like to close with the words of Israeli journalist Akiva Eldar and then Benjamin Netanyahu. Akiva Eldar once said in Haaretz, "It is much easier to claim the entire world is against us than to admit that the state of Israel, which rose as a refuge and a source of pride for Jews, has become a genuine source of danger and a source of shameful embarrassment to Jews who choose to live outside its borders." And Prime Minister Netanyahu, please remember your own words. Slide 20. Peace was always the desire of our people. Our prophets had a vision of peace. We greet each other with peace. Our prayers end with the word peace. Slide 21. Let us meet. Slide 22. Let us talk about peace. Slide 23. Let us make peace. Thank you.
Well, I think that was a very, very powerful. Presentation, Kathy. I don't know. It's extremely well balanced. I'm in admiration of your ability to talk about such a difficult subject, such a painful subject, with such clarity and purpose. And I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions, but I certainly have one, and I would like to put it out to all the panelists. And I'm going to follow Alan Dershowitz's advice. Well, actually, before I do that, let me say that I hope the people at the Left Forum who did not want you, Kathy, and the other speakers here today to speak got a good look at what you had to say, Ziyad and Samir as well. I have interviewed Alan Dershowitz in the past, and I'm in agreement with him. There's lots to talk about. So let's use his method. I have a question that's been on my mind for many years. I ask it occasionally, and it's inspired by the people of Gaza, particularly the children in Gaza. All right. And Alan Dershowitz wants us to be comparative, contextual, and fair. Okay. So I'm going to first be comparative. I would like everybody, especially you panelists, to imagine a young child trapped in Gaza today and a young child trapped in a German concentration camp during World War II. All right? That's comparative. That's two innocent children in very disgusting situations, okay, whose lives are miserable and possibly face death at any moment. So is that a comparison before we move on to the next thing?
maybe I'll just jump in if you can hear me. This is
Yes, Alison.
Because it's very interesting what you just said. According to the new official definition of anti-Semitism that was adopted by Hannah Rosenthal in 2010 for the U.S. State Department, and now has been adopted by the South Carolina legislature to apply to all universities and colleges in South Carolina, and legislation in the U.S. Congress to adopt it for the whole U.S. educational system. What you just said, even raising that question, comparing Gaza to the atrocities of the Holocaust, that's now officially in South Carolina, and according to the U.S. State Department, quote, anti-Semitism. This is
Well,
what
I'm not
Kathy
even
was
finished
talking
yet,
about.
Alison. I'm trying to follow the mind of Alan Dershowitz here. So I just let me provide the context now. He said comparison, context, and fair. According to him, if it's right. That way, it's okay, right? So the context is these children facing the horrible conditions that they face every day, understanding for sure why they're in these conditions. These two children, a Jewish child and a Palestinian child. And is it fair to ask the question, how can we explain to the Palestinian child that their situation, their horror is justified when the horror that the Jewish child went through in the Holocaust or in a concentration camp is not? Is that a fair question to ask? A child?
Do you want to answer it?
Oh, sure.
How do we explain the difference to a child?
That's really as a Palestinian, that's a comparison that I would like to hear. Unfortunately, you cannot say that. I agree with Alison, but that's a good comparison. That they both had horrors, and they really should not experience that. And like we explained it, I guess, for Jewish children, we need to explain it also for the Palestinian children, and tell it as is, that they've been in a prison, them and their families.
And it's not fair,
Yeah.
and they don't deserve it, and they need justice.
Well, I'm sure there's an answer that even Benjamin Netanyahu might have. Why doesn't he utter it? Please share it with us. I have a hole in my mind, in my soul, in my being where I don't get that. And maybe he can explain it to me. Maybe the entire Jewish state can explain it to me. I am open. I want to know, but I can't fathom it.
Well, I think a big part of the answer is just in the fact that the Gazan people are framed as supporters of Hamas, and Hamas is considered monsters. So if Hamas is doing this to children, then it's Hamas's fault. And it's a terrible shame, but it's their own fault for doing it to themselves. For the Jewish children in the Holocaust, that they didn't bring that on themselves. The Jewish people didn't bring that on themselves. And it was
nevertheless, Kathy, it was the same rationale used by the perpetrators in the Holocaust. It's the same rationale that this group is a bunch of monsters who brought a horror upon us, and therefore they deserve this kind of treatment.
I think
I don't agree with it in either case. But it sounds very much like a comparative comparison.
I think there's a difference in that in the concentration camps. They were in Poland, Germany, and so those Jewish children were in an already established country, not a country that was trying to be taken over. In Palestine, the way I see the Zionist project is Gaza is not Palestine. Gaza is those people, that child, are in the way of greater Israel, of their holy land, of their entitlement. Does that make sense? Like this child, the Jewish child, has to be gotten rid of. Well, anyway, it comes down to that the value of the Jewish child in Germany had no value. The Palestinian child, according to those that are being exterminating him, he or she has no value. Their life has no value, according to Netanyahu.
And they're children, so they're both innocent. Perhaps their parents are innocent as well, but there is no dispute that a child is innocent, whether it's Jewish or Palestinian or anybody. Now, what have they ever done?
Damage.
What have they ever done?
I think the day conflict, in my opinion.
Well, let's all pray for that day, and thank you all for working so hard to bring that day about and paying a price for it as well. We could go on a little bit longer if you all would like. We're at the scheduled end of this segment, but we do not have another segment scheduled after this. So is there anything else? Are there any questions? I did not see any questions sent in to me. Kat, are there any questions for the panel? Maybe not. Let's see, Alison, I hate to not take advantage of you being here. You are such a busy person, and rightfully so. How do you see your efforts of some people going forward? Are going forward same old? Are we reaching a critical mass point? In your valued opinion, what do you think about that?
Let's see, Alison, I hate to not take advantage of
sorry.
There's a nasty echo. I'm sorry.
There is a question.
See, your efforts going forward are going forward.
She's mute.
Alison is muted.
Are we reaching a critical mass point? In your valued opinion, what do you think about that? Let's see, Alison, I hate to take advantage.
I guess I'll try again. I know there's a problem with echoes, so
That was good.
I think we are approaching a critical mass. We're certainly not there yet, but in the 18 years that I've worked on this issue, I don't know what's going on technically. I keep hearing an echo now.
Everybody needs to be wearing headphones.
Yeah, I'm not.
Someone has switched them off.
It appears to me it's Alison.
Well, I don't think so. But anyway.
Okay, no, it's not.
I'm sure Alan knows more than I do, so maybe somehow I was doing it. The in terms of Alan's question, I think it's. I don't think I'm.
Yeah, are you listening? Okay, go ahead, do it.
Sure. My headphone is plugged in. As it was before. Maybe, yeah, it looks like maybe that fixed it. I think looks like maybe you turned off the Shihadah's microphone for a minute. Maybe that was, I'm not sure which of us is the guilty party, but anyway, I don't hear an echo. And the good thing is, definitely, I feel there's been a great deal of improvement in the last 18 years that I've worked on this issue. Many, many more people have started to wake up to what's going on. Many more people around the United States are now speaking out about this issue. Many are still afraid of being called anti-Semitic. Many are afraid of the career damage that can sometimes occur. But more people are speaking out, I think. And that's why the Israel partisans are becoming more blatant, I think, in their efforts to silence the work on this issue. I think that's one reason that now we have this new legislation that's very significant. I spoke about this on a panel yesterday. To change the official meaning of anti-Semitism is being changed in our country. It's part of a campaign that started 20 some years ago. And I've written a long article about this, but it's very important to be aware of this legislation that's in Congress right now and is in the state legislatures to change the definition of anti-Semitism to officially make criticisms of Israel, such as, you know, your very reasonable question to talk about the situation in the Palestinian ghetto and compare it to the Warsaw ghetto. That would now, and this is not hyperbole, according to the so-called State Department definition that was adopted by an Israel partisan, that would be anti-Semitism and would be prohibited on campuses in South Carolina right now. And if this new bill goes through the US Congress, it already was passed once by the Senate. So if the House passes it, this kind of conversation, reasonable, factual, fair-minded discussion, would be prohibited on America's campuses. This is now not only interfering with what, you know, causing tragedy in the Middle East, this is interfering with academic inquiry and freedom of speech in the United States. I think they're taking these draconian measures because so many people now are waking up, are concerned about what's happening to Palestinians. People from across the political spectrum I've met who are outraged at what our US tax money is allowing Israel to do and are speaking out more and more about that.
I think it's a sign of weakness and panic.
I hope you're right. I think it is. I think to a degree it is. Right now, I think Israel's very concerned about the fact that Americans are starting to wake up. So there are gatekeepers at the top. Trump's policies, as a number of articles have written, are being very much determined by a major donor to his campaign, Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon, a while ago, he's an American citizen, made a speech in which he said that he regretted that he had worn the US uniform. He wished that he had worn an Israeli uniform. This is one of this is the largest donor today, that kind of a statement. So at the top, there's the Israel lobby is still very powerful. It's still largely calling the shots, but we're starting to have some candidates around the country that are starting to speak out in favor of justice for Palestinians, and that's a major development.
Do you have anything to add?
What I've seen here where we're living, we struggle with this is really in a panic because the kinds of arguments that they've been coming up with, because you can't defend what's been happening the last 2 months. It's absolutely indefensible. And so they're scrambling and panicking, trying to come up with some way to defend it. And it just seems to us, as we're watching what they're coming up with, that they're running scared right now. So yeah, I think we're gaining ground.
Well, I could also say that, you know, the accusation of anti-Semitism is getting pretty stale. Sure, there are real anti-Semites out there, and I don't want to have anything to do with them or give them voice or anything like that. However, I find it fascinating, and I'll put this out to the panel to get your comment. In my experience, I find that the true anti-Semites and the Zionists are in absolute lockstep, 100% agreement on at least one subject, and that is both of them don't want you to believe that there is an iota of difference between Zionism and Judaism. I find that to be a remarkable situation where haters, anti-Semites, want you to think that there is no difference between Judaism and Zionism. And the Zionists, which is basically an atheist movement and has caused great problems for religious Jews, they want you to believe the same thing. Does anybody else find that to be a sort of a remarkable, strange bedfellows situation?
Yes.
I do. I think, and the sad thing is, for example, just recently, I believe it was in Atlanta, I read an article today, a group of rabbis, I think, as I said, I think it was in Atlanta, wrote a letter defending Israel. The Zionists and people from the mainstream Israel lobby who consistently try to conflate them. And I discovered that was actually a pattern from the very beginning of the Zionist movement in the United States. It's one of the things that Brandeis did. Because at that time, the large majority of Jewish Americans were not Zionists. There were many that were actively opposing Zionism in the region itself. The Jewish population in Palestine was opposed to Zionism. The Jewish population in England and in Europe was opposed to Zionism. The religious Jews, observant Jews, were especially opposed to Zionism. They considered it heretical. But with this major propaganda effort over many, many decades, Zionists nevertheless have now taken the forefront and consistently make a claim that's just not accurate.
And early on, the Zionists had nothing but contempt for religious Jews as well. They made that perfectly clear.
And they had contempt for Jewish Americans in general. They were very angry that they didn't all move to the Middle East. They were very angry that Jewish Americans were saying, we're happy here. This has nothing to do with us. They were not happy with people like Alfred Lilienthal, who wrote excellent books. He was a member of I think it's called the American Council on Judaism, that very, very vocally protested what Zionists were doing, allegedly in the name of Jewish Americans.
Mic back on. Sorry, I had my mic off. Anybody else would like to make any final comments?
Well, I'd like to say something really quick about piggybacking on what Alison said about the Trump administration and Sheldon Adelson. That's all true, of course, but it wouldn't have mattered if Hillary Clinton won the election, because the number one, or maybe number two or number three, one of the top financial supporters of the Democratic Party, and specifically Hillary Clinton, was Chaim Sabin. Chaim Sabin is on the record for saying he's a
issue voter.
A one-issue voter, and his one issue is Israel. And so it's a systemic thing. It's not this administration or that, and it's all the administrations. And until the people start voting in the right people, it's going to be just the same. It's the same system over and over.
It's in the news all the time. Young people are getting energized against Donald Trump. They seem to be very myopic to me because, they seem to be pro-war. I mean, there's no problem with war anymore if it's in Syria or Libya or whatever. I call them the pro-war left. They like to call themselves Antifa. How are they coming down on this issue? They're trying to prevent people who are speaking for the Palestinian cause from going onto their campuses and everything. Do you all see a struggle going on with that, or are they totally buffaloed? Is there any hope for these young people? Samir, you're the youngest among us, I would guess. I mean, educated. Perhaps
you might be right.
To that
you
crowd.
Might be right, but I can't speak on the Antifa. I just don't know enough about them.
All right.
I think I'd like to address that a little bit. The Antifa definitely do not represent young people. In the San Francisco area, from early on, there were many demonstrations against the war, against the invasion of Iraq. As soon as it happened, there were massive demonstrations in San Francisco against the Iraq war. There was a small portion of the demonstration that used to be called the Black Bloc, that was basically Antifa, that would go around causing destruction. They'd wear masks and really problems for the legitimate protesters. Sort of try to get all the media coverage, would go to these destructive component. Whereas the large majority of demonstrators were of a variety of ages and backgrounds and certainly races. and we're not doing anything destructive. So many of us have real questions about this Antifa movement that so often is extremely Orwellian. It calls itself in this trendy new name anti-fascist, but the tactics that it uses are very fascistic, very much reminiscent of brown shirts, back from the time of World War II and before World War II. But fortunately, they don't represent young people. Many students on campuses are very actively working for Palestinian rights.
Alison, to your point, I call them proto-fa, actually, because they seem like they're, brown shirts in the making. However, we live in fascinating times, and it forces us to look at history as you help us to do so well with your writings in your book. And I would say, yes, their tactics seem like moving in a fascistic direction. However, let's not forget the pain inflicted on humanity by the ultra-left. Let's not forget the millions that were killed in Russia and how the Russian soul was ripped out and the Orthodox Church was destroyed there, and how many conversations were stifled by a bullet in the back of the head. So I think that these tactics are not just the domain of the ultra-right, they're also the domain of the ultra-left. And I think and that was revolutionary, what happened in Russia. And I think some people are trying to foment the revolution. And so I am making that comparison as well. The excesses of the ultra-left as well. Everyone seems to forget and thinks the ultra-right came out of nowhere. Well, they fought each other very ardently and stridently in World War II.
My microphone is muted again.
You're on. You're on.
Okay.
You're on. You're on.
Okay. Thank you. I think that humanity, that human beings, that Americans should condemn all violence against people, against innocent people. In general, I don't like violence at all. Should condemn all genocides, all massacres, etc. So for this panel, I'd like to remain focused on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but I would like to clarify one thing about, bringing it back also to your question about Antifa, or however you pronounce it, Antifa. There are many people that I'm sure are involved in that segment of our population that are being misled. Not all of them are fascists. Certainly the tactics that are used, the images that are used in that movement, you go to their website and you see WEP glorified and they're holding a fist. So it clearly glorifies violence, but not every member of it, it doesn't represent all of those members. I know somebody who used to be a member of it, who's a very human, decent, good person. So again, I'm always concerned about generalizations where we say one group of people, they're all bad, and that's just fortunately never the case. So just that clarification.
Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that. I was just speaking about censorship, of which we're all suffering right now, and it seems like there's an awful lot of it coming from that group, and I wondered if that kind of attempt at censorship also encompassed the work that you do and so forth. That's all. That was my only comparison, as Alan Dershowitz would say. Context.
Yes, certainly a group of that nature in Portland, Oregon, specifically did try to silence me. So I've had a very unpleasant firsthand experience with some of its tactics.
I don't know how anybody could want to hurt this lady. Look at her. She's just
in spades. And so I would like to thank you very much for bringing that to us all continually, not just in this conference.
Thank you.
Alison, let's go across the board here. IfAmericansKnew.org, is that the best place for people to go to get your information?
Yes, IfAmericansKnew.org. There's a glitch. So when you go there, it will actually say in the URL, IfAmericaKnew.org, because of a technical server process. And then when you go there, you will be able to click on a link that takes you to our blog, which the URL for that is IsraelPalestineNews.org. And that's where we try to post updates pretty much every day. Even today, we managed to get a few in. So I'm glad you've mentioned that. And while I get the chance, I know we all have to get back to work soon, but I just want to thank all the people, all the staff members and panelists and Ziyad on this panel. I'm so proud of what you've all done and the work you've done and the powerful videos that Samir has made. So thank you so much for all of your work and for being on the panel.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for fighting the good fight. It needs to be done, and you're doing it. You're leading the way. Thank you very much. Samir, do you have anything to add? Can people go to find more of your video, please?
I just want to thank people for watching, and you can go to our If Americans Knew page, Twitter page, Instagram page. You can see our posts, our videos, not just my videos, but some of the other filmmakers on the team. And follow us there. More videos to come. Thank you.
Okay, and Kathy and Ziyad, is there a website or a blog or something that you're associated with that you would like to share with our audience?
Yes, well, I write a lot for If Americans Knew, and also have a website that we have put together not too long ago called PalestineHome.org. So there's more goodies there.
And on behalf of all the Palestinians, like Kathy said in her segment, it took me a long time. My parents were very sad, but in a silent way. They did not speak too much about it. They were kind of like felt disgrace and that they did not do enough. And they told me a lot of stories, but in a way that stories that we want you to take on and remember because we're going to go away, but don't do anything with them. And Kathy, thanks to Kathy, she pulled me out of that because she said one day, I'm going to do it with you or without you. And I just felt obligated to do it. And I'm glad I did because I met so many people, American people, one at a time, that just a little education, it just made a big difference in their lives. And they've been advocates for us and really give me hope. And the best thing of all this conversation that we're conducting in many ways and many different ways really gives hope to our people back in Palestine, especially Gaza. They're under so much pressure, but when they know any picture they send or video they send or anything happens, they know there are a lot of good friends looking at it, watching it, and do something about it. That gives them hope. Otherwise, I don't know why they're even still alive. But the hope that we're giving them by what we're doing and what we did today, for example, is really going to keep him alive and keep him doing what they need to do to survive and to fight the fight for their land. It's really that's what it is. It's resistance. And a couple of things we emphasized here today, that these people in Gaza, especially 70 to 80% of them, they're really not from Gaza. They're still living the same place where their grandparents and parents lived at, the same little room or shack. So it reminds us a reminder to them that there's still a struggle to fight. And really, it's them. They're taking the lead. It's not Hamas. It's not whatever. I'm not Hamasi. It's just like people just hijack the whole cause by using that word. And I hope one day we just stop doing that. Thank you. Thank you.
Acknowledge the rest of the If Americans that didn't happen to be on this panel. How important a part they play there. This isn't the full If Americans Knew staff at all. There's Chris Smiley, who's been making excellent videos called Headlines from Palestine that have been on Facebook. There's our webmaster, our administrator, Syed, who puts together our timeline where we document everybody that's killed in Palestine and in Israel. So I'd like to thank all the other If Americans Knew staff members that are such an important part of our team and didn't happen to be on this particular panel.
Well, you're their leader. And your collective work certainly has helped inform me and given me a lot of hope as well by keeping me informed. like that. So thank you, yes, to all the rest of the staff. Ziyad and Kathy, I'm a piker compared to you guys. I'm going to be celebrating my 25th wedding anniversary in September, but you guys have been at it for 32 years. So that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you.
And, you know, we hear so much about immigration and migration these days. And I can't think of a better example of, you know, a wonderful benefit from that, the one that you present and how you've helped each other out. And, you know, it's really great. My wife gets to me sometimes and gets me moving when I should be and I'm not. So I know how it feels. And you've really drawn some great, powerful information out of Ziyad. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For sure.
All right. And Samir, who I don't see anymore, but thank you for, there you go. It's important that it's intergenerational. We got a bunch of old fogies here, so we're passing the torch to you. So, all right, you got big shoes to fill, and I'm sure you're going to do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good friends. That concludes today's programming for the Deep Truth Symposium. Visionaries Speak Out. We'll be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. with a panel on dark technology, geoengineering, 5G, smart meters, and other Faustian bargains. Thank you very much.